It's a well-known fact, long periods without rain in desert regions create serious challenges for farming and raising livestock. Honestly, for life in general, too. That's why farmers in these areas rarely have any kind of stable, decent income. But in the interior areas of the Kibuchi Desert in Inner Mongolia, there's a place called Dalad Banner that defies the usual notions of life in a desert. Farmers there are raising rabbits, millions of rabbits. And these rabbits bring in huge amounts of money. So this is a story about how China let a bunch of rabbits loose in the desert and changed it forever. Did it look like this? Well, actually, it's a bit more complicated than that. First, I'll have some coffee, then we'll continue. It's going to be super interesting today. Just an unobtrusive reminder to hit that like button, only if that's your thing. And thanks to those who get my wish to stay anonymous. This is the vast Kibuchi Desert. Despite the winter chill, and this is northern China, so it gets really cold, the dedicated workers are waging war against the sand. They're busy fixing and strengthening protective structures made of straw, arranged in a checkerboard pattern across the desert's surface. These structures are crucial for shielding the dunes. And yes, the repairs have to be done in winter. The workers are rushing to finish their tasks before the spring winds roll in so they can test the protection in action one more time. Straw checkerboards are used to stop wind erosion and keep moisture in the ground. By fixing them up every winter, people make sure the boards can hold shifting sand securely all year round. After all, the Kibuchi Desert, China's 7th largest desert, spans 7,200 square miles. So yeah, there's a ton of sand there. In the 1950s and 1960s, with strong government support, Inner Mongolia started building sand control stations and launched tree planting projects along the northern edge of the desert. Since then, cities in this area have gradually turned greener. And this is great news because Inner Mongolia is one of the regions in China most affected by desertification. The region has long made sand control a top priority in the fight against desertification. They're consistently running the 3 North Shelter Belt Forest Program and pushing forward other environmental initiatives like tree planting and enforcing bans on grazing. Because the more animals graze in the area, the less vegetation there is, and the higher the risk of desertification. You know how it works, don't you? In 2024, the region not only reached but surpassed its yearly goals for fighting desertification and planting greenery, achieving 113% and 148% of the targets, respectively. This means Inner Mongolia now has the country's largest forest area, about 59 million acres, and grasslands covering 45%, the highest level since 1990. What used to be a barren stretch of sandy soil is now turned into a sea of green, complete with bushes. Every now and then you'll spot a line of slender, angular tracks on the ground, probably left by deer. In short, it's a beautiful sight. But what do rabbits have to do with it? The development of the Kibuchi Desert is really closely tied to rabbit farming. To be more precise, Rex rabbits. Of course, this doesn't mean they're actually growing rabbits in the desert and then just waiting for them to somehow turn the desert into an oasis on their own. It all started with a local entrepreneur who invested his money in buying willow saplings and then suggested others try planting these saplings in the local desert. Willows are generally very drought resistant, plus they have high economic value and grow great in the desert, but there's a catch. About 3 years after growing, willows need special care, otherwise their economic value drops sharply. For example, trees like these can no longer be used to make paper, which is considered to be of very high quality, higher quality than paper made from other types of wood. This is where rabbits come in. Young willow shoots are the perfect food for Rex rabbits, and the thick stems left after their meal can be used to make paper and particle board. For the desert, these trees are also beneficial. Like any plants, they help protect against wind and stabilize sand. Since willows have a very well-developed root system that can reach a length of over 328 feet, even one tree will securely hold the sand around it. The locals raise rabbits in the desert, but these aren't the domestic rabbits most people think of. These are Rex rabbits, and their distinctive feature is the fur, which feels like otter fur. Like other rabbits that are bred in large numbers, not as pets, they can be eaten, but the Rexes are mainly valued for their fur. Anyway, the fur is worth more than the meat. And for the rescue mission to fight desertification, these rabbits are perfect. Their reproductive rate is really high, so much so that many Chinese sources even mention the number as 25 times higher than other animals. Also, the dry desert climate is perfect for these rabbits. They feel super comfortable, which is why the Rex rabbits bred in the Kibbuchi Desert have especially high-quality fur. Since we're talking about China, they have a zero-waste approach here. Some parts of rabbits are used in traditional medicine. Rabbit feces can be used as fertilizer, really great for desert land that you want to turn into fertile soil. The byproducts left from rabbits can also be used to feed minks, foxes, wolves, and other animals with economic value. Rex remains the #1 breed used for fur and clothing and toys, since their fur doesn't have any guard hairs, which other breeds need to be shaved and plucked after tanning to resemble the fur of other animals. Meat producers prefer to process young animals. So young, in fact, that at this age the rabbit hasn't had time to grow quality adult fur. Fur improves at 6 months old and during the coldest part of the year. But the meat of adult rabbits is also used for food, so the production is truly waste-free. Everything's put to use. Even if, in general, this looks pretty sad from an animal protection perspective. But let's go back to changing the desert with rabbit power. Planting willows is necessary, but we can't fully rely on trees. We've got a combination of factors here: the high reproductive capacity of the Rex rabbit, the already planted willows, and the continuous breeding of animals. The key point is that Rex rabbit manure can produce biogas, and the leftover biogas can fertilize fields. This is part of the zero-waste system, and for the desert, it's literally vital. In other words, as this chain progressed, the sand gradually turned into fields where agricultural crops could be grown, and it happened almost on its own. As soon as the soil becomes consistently fertile, greenhouses for large-scale organic vegetable production can be built on it. By the way, an important detail: this breed of rabbits has very low water needs, meaning Rex rabbits are relatively drought-resistant. They love eating hay and have a habit of gathering it. Also, Rex rabbits can't digest grass seeds and enjoy digging holes. The combination of these traits makes them the best grass producers in the desert. Check out how this works. The rabbit finds grass and eats it, digesting everything but the seeds. Then it poops in the desert, and the undigested seeds fall into the sand as fertilizer, which sprouts the next year. More grass, less sand. It's a good thing. So what happened in the end? The entrepreneur rented almost 100 bulldozers so they could drive into the drying desert, level the dunes one after another, fill in the ravines, and let the workers plant willows on the smooth sand. He then encouraged and supported the locals in breeding Rex rabbits. This went on for at least 10 years, and during that time, the area was completely transformed. Of course, it's not just about trees and rabbits. Huge amounts were invested in building new villages. In 2013, for example, more than 3 billion yuan, or over $400 million, were spent. This, in turn, attracted nearby farmers and herders, giving them the chance to grow and make the desert even livelier. Gradually, the area planted with willows has exceeded 3 million acres. Over 2,000 Rex rabbits are raised here, and more than 3 million of them are sold every year. The average annual income of farmers can reach 50 to 70,000 yuan, or $6,800 to $9,600. More than 10,000 farmers and herders, once poor, have practically struck it rich. In 2017, reporters came here to interview the locals and found that the environment had improved a lot compared to what it used to be. Well, the local authorities of Dalad Banner are fully aware of the huge potential for developing the rabbit farming industry. They're actively promoting the relevant sectors, and people are getting richer. And the desert's turning green. As of July 2017, the number of Rex rabbits in Dalad Banner alone reached 4.5 million, and the total industry production was 560 million yuan, or $76 million. Pretty serious amounts. No wonder rabbit breeding not only helps local farmers and herders escape poverty and get rich, but also attracts migrant workers. This employee is showing newborn Rex rabbits in a standardized breeding center. Yeah, there's clearly a huge number of cages, and the operation is running like clockwork. There are a lot of rabbits, for sure. And they really have changed the lives of many. When farmers come here, all they need to do is invest between 20,000 to 30,000 yuan, or between $2,700 and $4,100 to buy breeding rabbits and cages for them. That's it. Nothing else is needed for breeding. Other businesses will just support them. In each family, the income can reach 50,000 to 80,000 yuan or $6,800 to $11,000, and if it's a large-scale operation, it can even exceed 100,000 yuan or $13,000. Honestly, I'll admit, we first came across the Chinese rabbits in a YouTube video. They were saying that rabbits were released into the desert, and it suddenly turned green, and everything was great. In the comments, of course, there were a lot of confused people. They were asking a fair question. What about Australia? There are deserts there too, and plenty of rabbits, but for some reason, those rabbits are considered pests. And the Australian deserts aren't starting to turn green with their presence. So what's the deal with that? We've talked many times about the problems Australians face because of rabbits, but now we've figured out how they do things in China. And I can answer these questions, although no one asked me specifically, of course. So yes, the Chinese actually used rabbits to transform the desert. The story of turning it into an oasis isn't fake, but it's also not exactly the story you might have imagined. The rabbit is just a tool to get the local people involved in changing the environment. Regular folks improved their lives by raising rabbits, and that, in turn, helped protect the local environment. One wouldn't have worked without the other. That's why the miracle didn't happen in Australia. But let's go back to China. Because the desert I'm talking about today is known not only for the willows and rabbits, there's also the Junma power plant here. Today, strolling around its territory, it's hard to imagine that this used to be barren land, once called the Sea of Death. Taking up about 346 acres and made up of more than 196,000 photovoltaic panels, forming the image of a galloping horse, the station is the largest desert photovoltaic station in China. But that's not the only record, because it's also the largest image made of solar panels in the world. This is confirmed by the Guinness World Records. By 2022, the project generated over 2.3 billion kilowatt-hours of clean, eco-friendly electricity, which is equivalent to saving 760,000 tons of standard coal and cutting carbon dioxide emissions by 1.85 million tons. But that's not all the nice perks, because in addition to providing clean energy to local residents and businesses, the solar power plant also helps combat desertification. Plus, it allows people to earn extra income since they can grow crops and graze livestock under the panels. All of this helps different industries survive, including tourism. Yeah, desert tourism, why not? Plus, photovoltaic panels can not only generate electricity, but also improve the environment for anyone who happens to be under them. The construction of this station was part of China's long-term plan to build the Great Solar Wall, which is supposed to generate enough energy for Beijing. As a result, the Junma Solar Station produces enough to meet the annual electricity needs of 300,000 to 400,000 people. This, as you can imagine, is just part of the project. There will be more. By the way, the panels also helped reduce the wind speed near the ground by 50%, a useful addition to the nets for sand fixation and plant growth. Usually it takes a decade to achieve this effect, but here it only took 4 years. By the end of November 2022, the Junma Solar Power Plant helped green around 2,600 acres of desert land, but rabbits did their part here too. At the station, they live together with other domestic animals like sheep and geese. Photovoltaic panels use water when they're cleaned, and this water ends up in the sand. And since they also create shade, evaporation is minimal, which is good for the grass growing underneath. However, the grass grows tall and becomes a nuisance because it interferes with the station's operation. And what's better for dealing with grass than animals that eat it? So the staff keeps a lot of sheep and rabbits and uses them to get rid of the grass. So what do we have in the end? As of June 2024, China led the world in the capacity of operating solar power plants with 386,875 megawatts, which makes up about 51% of the global total. The growth of solar energy in China has been especially rapid over the past decade. From 2017 to 2023, the country's installed solar capacity grew by an average of 39,994 megawatts per year. In comparison, the solar capacity of the United States grew by an average of 8,137 megawatts over the same period. In fact, it should be said that rabbits aren't the first case where China solves its problems with animals. In 2020, Pakistan was hit by a locust invasion, That's when reports started coming in that China was sending its army of ducks to help the country. And although the news was later denied, the duck army is still something worth talking about because it really works. About 20 years ago, ducks turned out to be an effective method for dealing with locusts. The year was 2000, and in Xinjiang, an autonomous region in the northwest of China, they actually sent an entire army of ducks and chickens, 700,000 of them. The birds were given a mission to deal with the locust swarms that had destroyed more than 9 million acres of crops and pastures. At that time, researchers found that ducks are more effective than chickens at eating harmful pests. In other words, one duck can eat more than 200 locusts a day. That's about 3 times more than one chicken. Plus, ducks tend to stay in groups, so they're easier to manage than chickens. And if you've ever seen chickens in real life, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Also, using ducks as biological weapons is cheaper and more environmentally friendly than spraying pesticides on locusts. The practice of using ducks to fight locusts is actually an ancient Chinese method, but its effectiveness was limited. For example, in 1953, Chuzhou, Jiangsu province, had to use ducks to destroy locusts, but only because of the climate and other factors. At that time, due to the prolonged autumn rains, the water level in the lake rose and all the areas where locusts appeared were flooded. Most of the locusts gather on reeds and weeds, and poison baits and manual trapping clearly wouldn't have worked in flooding conditions, but ducks love water. They had to be used, but only because all other options were off the table. Ducks managed to wipe out up to 95% of the locusts in certain areas and even up to 100% in others. Of course, people had to put in some effort too. They split the ducks into groups of 2,500 and watched them carefully, probably to make sure they wouldn't eat what they weren't supposed to. In 2014, in northern China's Hebei province, chickens were used to fight locusts. In Inner Mongolia, they even brought in guinea fowls, which are fast runners, good flyers, and never tire of eating locusts. I imagine they handle the heat well, since guinea fowls originally come from Africa. There are also starlings that hunt in groups surrounding their prey. This way they can consume up to 180 locusts per day. However, ducks and their insatiable appetites are on another level. But not all ducks are suited for this task, only the egg-laying ones. Meat ducks, bred for their flesh, aren't as effective at eating locusts. They gain weight quickly and don't seem particularly skilled at hunting. But if ducks are doing so well, why weren't they sent to Pakistan? The answer's simple. Ducks rely on water, and in Pakistan's desert regions, the temperatures are just too high. They wouldn't survive. The most important news in recent days is that I got my hands on some really tasty loose-leaf green tea. Yaks versus deserts. The Zoiga County is one of the largest areas in China, known for its vast wetlands and marshes. While the landscape is beautiful, it may soon disappear. According to data from the Sichuan Desertification Monitoring Center, over 200 lakes in Zoiga had disappeared by 2009, and more than 114,000 acres of pasture land turned into desert. Additionally, around 30% of the pastures in Zoiga, located at an altitude of 11,400 feet, are at risk of desertification. The situation, as you realize, is serious, and the authorities are doing everything they can to preserve Zoiga County. For example, over a 7-year period, they successfully organized 800 local herders to plant grass, which helped restore a significant amount of land. Additionally, they developed an optimal planting method for the county. First, deep furrows are made in the soil, which are then filled with a mixture of grass seeds and fertilizers, and finally covered up. On top of that, protective forest belts, straw barriers, and the joint cultivation of forage crops are also used. It seemed that after such measures, desertification should have been stopped. But that turned out to be insufficient. So the authorities decided to turn to animals once again, this time to yaks. How can they help? It's really simple. Animals are let into enclosed areas where they help compress the seeds into the soil. Studies carried out in Zoiga found that moderate grazing by livestock speeds up the recovery of damaged meadows. What's most interesting is that local herders had proposed something like this before, but their suggestions were overlooked. Now, though, the authorities are asking for their help, even with experts and cutting-edge technology available. Pros and cons of goats. Which animals have I already mentioned in today's video? There were rabbits, ducks, chickens, yaks, even starlings and sheep. The only ones left to talk about are goats. By the way, they're responsible for land issues, but at the same time, they can solve them. How come? Well, look, scientists from Oregon State University found that goats and sheep grazing in huge numbers on the fields of Mongolia have caused serious damage to the vegetation. Research shows that about 80% of the plant loss in these areas is due to overgrazing. And saying the grazing is truly excessive is not an exaggeration. Since 1990, partly due to economic changes after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the number of livestock in Mongolia has doubled, reaching 45 million head. Rising unemployment led to an increased interest in traditional animal husbandry, so goats have multiplied at a frightening rate. Meanwhile, in Mongolia, the situation with soil fertility isn't exactly great. Take, for example, the Gobi Desert in the south of the country, which is constantly expanding and threatening both the ecosystem and the planet's climate as a whole. And now there are goats, who are only making things worse. Or are they? While studying goat farming, it turned out that these animals not only contribute to land degradation, but also play a key role in nature's cycles. Goats grazing on pastures naturally till the soil with their hooves and fertilize it, which promotes plant growth and helps maintain the nutrient exchange between flora and fauna. So you get it, right? Goats destroy the pastures, but at the same time, they stimulate plant growth. The solution here is simple. Establish communication with the herders and regulate the grazing time for the animals. That way, a balance should be achieved. Spain's strategy. And yet, humanity is trying to do something to preserve the land. Take China, for example, which we've been talking about so much today, or Spain. This country's also developed a long-term plan to fight desertification. Andalusia, the world's largest producer of olive oil with its vast, densely planted olive groves, is particularly at risk of desertification. This key region is set to be restored first. So what's the plan here? By 2030, the focus will be on strengthening ecosystems and wildlife diversity in the country's driest areas, which include Andalusia. First, agricultural activity will be ramped up. Second, they plan to regulate pasture-based livestock farming. Just to remind you, when grazing is intensive, the land suffers, but when it's moderate, it recovers. So that should work. Third, they'll regulate the use of water resources so there's enough for both irrigation and human needs. Local authorities, scientists, farmers, and other interested parties will be actively involved in all these processes. With such a variety of experts, everything should go according to plan. The strategy also includes creating a desertification atlas for the country, an online resource, and a national council to coordinate land restoration efforts. All of this sounds really impressive, but experts warn that such a grand plan will take a lot of time. You owe me one unobtrusive like. See you later.